Archvale must be one of the juiciest games I ever played. For this video I talked to the creator to see how the hell he made that happen. Both Archvale as well as this video are possible thanks to GameMaker, so once you're ready to start making your own awesome games, check out the link in the description. My name's Jonas and my guest today is the one and only IDoZ.
I think it's a problem I have where I can't work on stuff if it doesn't look good. If I've got a combat system, I have to polish it immediately, and that's not necessarily a good thing. You probably shouldn't do that. But generally, when I make games, I'm not trying to make any particularly unique mechanics or anything. I just want to make a super polished experience, which is, it's not dissimilar to stuff you've played before, but I want to get the level of polish up there. So it very quickly became kind of embedded in me that every single thing I add, I need to do some stuff to.
So are you somebody who instantly has to polish something once it's in the game? You instantly have the urge to get it polished?
Yeah, no, and
Okay.
if I add something and I draw my own art, I'm very quickly like, Fops, please make some art that looks good for this. I can't stand looking at it.
Okay, yeah, I can kind of tell playing the game because everything looks so polished and juicy. You can really see that it's something you're passionate about. You even made a video on your YouTube channel where you explain some of the tricks you're using with like the squash and stretch of everything.
I mean, if you look back at the very first devlog, you'll see it looks incredibly similar to how it looks in the end, because all that polishing stuff I did straight away just because I wanted it to look good. I think another part of this is to do with the fact I was sharing it on social media, and you want those effects to look good for your posts to do well. I think the most successful post we had was me sharing the bushes, just breaking bushes. That was like one of the highest engagement posts we did. And that was something I had super early because I knew if we have these combat gifs and in the background these bushes are breaking all over the place, this is going to look really good. So that's another pretty big part of it, the kind of public view, and you want to make sure it looks good.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense from a marketing perspective. That's true, polishing things up early. But was there any case where that kind of bit you in the back or something, that you polished something too early and then it had to be reworked completely? Or
in the end, I think we got really quite lucky because there was no situation where I encountered that the polish I'd added before got in the way of anything. There were times where it was like, I could make that polish better, but there was never a moment where, I need to rework this system and I've got all this polishy code that's in the way and I can't work out what I'm doing. It was like, we never encountered that. And Archvale is a massive project file. It's huge. So maybe everyone's wrong and you should polish. But
I guess there are different ways to go about it. But I find that very interesting that you polished everything right out of the gate and actually ended up working out so smoothly. That's pretty interesting to me. But maybe that was because of the thing you said earlier, that you're not really making anything unexpected, right? You're kind of sticking to established formulas. You know relatively well what you want to make. So there are probably no scenarios where you're like, okay, we have to rework that system completely or something.
Yeah,
like
exactly. The mechanics that were difficult to work out and that we had to make complicated decisions about weren't really related to the moment-to-moment shooting things and hitting things. That was pretty set in stone from the beginning. I mean, it's a top-down shooter. You're going to shoot at the enemies and they're going to shoot at you. And, you could add stuff on top of that. But in the end, this is a tried and tested formula. There's so many games like this, and we were just trying to make another one that was quite good.
I'm not sure how much you can say about this, because obviously Fops made a lot of the art I see here on Steam.
Yes.
I feel like I'm just baffled kind of by how professional everything looks, from the animation to the sound to it just feels like such a professional package.
Oh man, it's cool when people say that. I've heard a few people say that, and it's like when I look at it, I don't see that, and I think this is the case with everyone with whatever they make. It's like I see it and I see it still looks quite amateur to me. It still looks like, these bits could have looked better and stuff. But everyone says to me, like, this looks like a professional game. And it's like, does it? And I don't know at what point it crossed that threshold and started to look professional to people, because it still feels like an amateur game that I've just thrown together in my bedroom. But yeah, apparently it's professional looking. And I couldn't tell you how we did that.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's a lot of small things adding up over time, probably, right? Because I feel honestly, I feel kind of similar about my game, Will You Snail. I don't think it's super professional looking. There might be people with a different opinion. I don't know.
I think it looks very good, Will You Snail. I think it's a very impressive
thank you.
Aesthetic.
Yeah, but I feel like that's something a lot of people can probably identify with, this imposter syndrome of, I'll never be able to make something as good looking as that, and then one day you just pull it off and you don't even realize.
You don't notice,
Like, it's fascinating. Really, this game feel and polishes a lot of small things adding up. So let's maybe try to talk about these small things to the best of our ability.
I've got a little list.
First
here.
of all, I got awesome. I have a little bit of a list as well.
Oh,
First
cool.
of all,
okay.
I have to give big props to Fops, I think, for just the coloring. I feel like the colors in every biome, everything's working really well. It just looks very, very nice, very pleasing to look at, and that already sets the basis, the foundation for everything coming on top.
Yeah, for sure. One thing that we did with the colors and stuff, Fops used a pretty rigid palette. I think it was 32 colors. And then on top of that, every single biome had a lighting shader over it. So, there's lights, but at the same time, we changed the color of the ambient light. So if you look at the forest with lighting on versus the forest with lighting off, it looks an awful lot less vibrant when the filter is turned off that goes over everything. We did a lot of work on trying to fine-tune the RGB tweaks that we had in the shader to each area, which helped to give it a bit more of a distinct look between places, even though we're using a very rigid palette.
Okay, that's interesting. Now I'm looking at the screenshots on Steam right now, and I now I see what you mean.
Yeah.
the lighting probably does a lot. Yeah, that's cool. That's funny, because in Will You Snail it's very similar. Like, without the post-processing, the game looks incredibly garbage. Yeah, I bet yours still looks fine without the lighting.
It still looks, the art is still very good. Fops did a really good job with the art. But yeah, the post-processing does help it pop a little bit more between areas and stuff like that. And I basically had a bunch of tools in my arsenal for making stuff feel good. One of the major things we used literally everywhere, it was a tweening library. We used one called Easy Tween. And a tweening library, if people don't know, is you pass in a number between 0 and 1, and it will kind of graph it in some way to make the value do something nice. So you can get ones that kind of ease out as you get closer to 1, or you can get ones that bounce back. And we use those ones that kind of bounce back literally all over the place in every animation. So this includes things like HP bars, how we do the squash and stretch on enemies was using the tweening library, the screen shake, everything was through a tweening library.
Okay. Crazy. Are we talking like a GameMaker plugin, or how did you implement that tweening library?
So the one that we used, which was called Easy Tween, it was literally just a drag and drop script. Like, you just shoved the script in your project file, and you had access to a function that was just called Easy Tween. You'd say a tween type, you pass the value through, and you'd just get whatever results you wanted from that. It was really easy to set up. I think GameMaker, we started Archvale before GameMaker added animation curves, and I think animation curves now are like an equivalent built-in thing. I haven't played with those yet, but they look really useful. So yeah, I think it's animation curves. I haven't, I don't know for sure.
Okay, another thing that I think you did really well, and that, in my opinion, really helps to sell this professional look, is that you don't overdid a lot of the things, right? In some places, you put in all of that extra effort to add some polishing, but then you toned it down so much that it's like really, really, really subtle and almost not noticeable.
Yes.
And one thing I think a lot of developers do, myself probably included, is that if we implement a new particle effect or a new shake or something, we're like, I want people to see this, so we ramp it up a bunch, and then it starts looking really messy because everything's jiggling around everywhere and everything's flashing, and you can't really see anything anymore.
Yeah, that was, honestly, I don't know if I ever got to a point where it felt like I had to get rid of things. There were some things. We used to have, like, sometimes it would rain, and I was getting feedback where it's like, I can't even tell what's going on anymore. So it's like, okay, get rid of the rain. But in terms of just the juice, often a lot of what we were trying to do with the juice was to communicate things more clearly than they were before. One example is when a bullet emerges, every single bullet has the smoke particle behind it that matches the color, and it just helps to highlight that the bullets come into existence. So in general, when we added juicy stuff, we were trying to accentuate the things that change gameplay in the moment, and the things that are actually important that are going on. For example, we don't really have much happen when a projectile leaves the play space. There's like a tiny little particle effect, but it was something that was kind of an afterthought. I focused all the polish on when new elements get introduced, and I was trying to make sure that the juice was behind whatever it was that was being introduced. So really, it was pulling your eye towards the new gameplay object, or giving you feedback when you were hitting an enemy. That's a bit different to that. But yeah, when it came to non-player actions that were being highlighted by juice, we were trying to make sure it was only when new stuff is being added to the playfield that we highlighted it. And it's even more important because we have so much stuff going on. There's so many bullets flying everywhere. So yeah, it was important that we could show when a new bullet pattern was starting and the bullets didn't all merge into one mass.
Yeah. Yeah, I see. That's really interesting. So you're saying one of the main thoughts behind adding polish was almost always to communicate something to the player.
Yeah.
So for example, when you damage an enemy and you have these little parts breaking off from the HP bar, you want to communicate how much damage did you deal, right? Or when you have a little UI jiggle, you want to pull some attention to that. So you're not just adding polish without intent, you're adding polish in places where you want people to pay attention.
Yeah, exactly. And that point about the enemy health bar was something that we added quite late into development, health bars under every enemy, because we thought this is a good way of showing you when you're in a new area how much damage you're actually doing to these enemies. It communicated that really clearly. Like, are you in an area that's too hard for you right now? Are these enemies going to take ages to kill? So yeah, we stuck those health bars there because it communicated, are we in too hard of an area right now? That kind of thing.
All right. So what else do you have on your polishing list?
Yeah. So one of the major things we had was we've got this one sprite, and this is actually one of the only sprites that I made entirely myself, which is a smoke sprite. And if you look at it on its own, it looks pretty bad, to be honest. It's not a good animation. We have two variants of it. We've got one that's just this kind of smoke puffing out, and we've got one that has a white and black flash before the smoke puffs out. So it works as an explosion and it works as smoke. And that particle is used literally everywhere. Like, it's the one particle we use for everything. So yeah, we changed the scale of it, we changed the rotation and things like that. But yeah, we use this one particle for basically everything. So when you see smoke coming out of things, when you see flames, every little bit of flame is made out of this one particle. Every bit of hit impact, the smoke behind projectiles when they get fired, all the exact same sprite. And it looks like rubbish on its own.
So that's interesting.
Yeah, when you look at it in context, it can look a lot better. The other thing I realized about particles in GameMaker, if you're at this zoomed in perspective, it can be really nice to draw your particles to a surface first so that they get pixelated to the true resolution. Because if you rotate a nice clean sprite in GameMaker, it's going to give you a very clean rotation. Versus when you rotate it pixely, and then it looks really jagged but still smooth somehow. And it's like when you take these particles that are when they're rotating around and stuff, normally they look really bad, but if you run them through a surface and they turn pixelated, they look really good. A good example of that is our torches. If you could see those without the pixelation, they'd look like rubbish. They'd look really bad. But because they're going through this, they're being drawn to a surface first, and then we're resizing the surface when it comes out. It looks really good. So yeah, pixelating the particles is a very helpful thing, I think. I've got a couple more bits on my little list if you want me to keep going.
Yes.
Yeah, one massive thing was getting enemy knockback to work, just in general. I know I've talked about the sprite slanting, but the actual act of the enemy moving backwards when you hit it is really, really important for the feel of it. The thing you've got to remember is that this also has an influence on gameplay, which is something I think a lot of the talks about game feel forget to talk about. They're like, make your gun shoot faster and bigger bullets because that feels better. But it's also like that has an impact on gameplay. And yeah, enemy knockback influences your gameplay, because if you've got a really rapid firing weapon and it knocks back the enemy the same amount as everything else, that the rapid fire weapons just send the enemies flying. So you need to think about how you implement knockback. The way we did it in Archvale was that non-melee weapons basically had a cooldown on the knockback, so they'd hit the enemy backwards, but then the next few hits wouldn't. And I initially thought that's going to feel really weird and rubbish, but in the end it actually felt completely fine for the enemies to sometimes get knocked back and sometimes not. It's just making sure there's, it's especially the first impact, the first time you change target and hit an enemy, you want to see that you've hit that enemy. You want to feel they've been hit. So yeah, the knockback there is really useful. And then kind of related to this is that when you have juicy stuff going on, like particle effects, I think it's really important to have some element of them preserve the momentum of the thing that spawned it. So if you've got a projectile that is flying at high speed and it hits a wall and it just spawns like a kind of poof projectile like that, it kind of looks a bit off because the projectile was so fast and then suddenly it's just this static thing. So with a projectile going quickly, I think it's nice to make the particle effect move backwards, using some of the momentum that it had. With enemies, when you kill them, if you've got knockback on the enemies, I think you need to send something flying backwards. We did the nuclear thrown corpses, so you hit an enemy, when it dies, a corpse flies out backwards. I think, and it's the same when you hit an enemy. You want the impact shouldn't just stay still. I think it needs to move around, and I think moving your particle effects is really important. And preserve some momentum. And I don't even think it's like all of the particles need to do this. When you dash, for example, you could just have some of the particles kind of move at the same speed as you are, and some of them stay behind. I think it's just it can look really off when the particles and the effects are just static and they're not matching the momentum of anything. So that was a big consideration that we had with our.
I think that is a really good tip. That's a good one. I use that in Will You Snail as well. For example, with these destructible blocks that kind of fall down and break into pieces when they hit the ground.
I hated those.
Obviously.
I remember playing the demo. I got stuck on that level.
Very rage-inducing for sure. But the particles that are spawned when like one of these bricks hits the ground, they're not like poof in all directions, but they keep the momentum and keep falling in the same direction basically. And I feel like that you're right. That makes it feel a lot better. Just having things acknowledge how they were created and the context, and not just being one static poof that you use everywhere. That's
for sure. Yeah,
that's a very good point. Yeah,
that is my full list.
That's your full list.
One thing I missed is kind of a GameMaker specific tip. But obviously, enemies flashing and things flashing in general is just really nice to have. When you hit an enemy, they flash in Archvale. When you do things like you put a key into a lock, at the moment of impact, the lock will flash, then the key turns. There's a lot of ways to do flashes really easily. One of them is the GPU set fog function, which is it just lets you set a color and everything you draw will be entirely that color. Or in some situations, we wanted to, because what you'll find, especially if you have black outlines in your art, when you do a flash, everything will look a bit chunkier because that black outline is turning a solid color. So we also had a shader in some situations where it would set everything except black to the color. So there's a few ways of doing flashes, and I think both of those, because sometimes it's nice to have those black outlines turn the solid color. It looks more flashy, but sometimes you don't want that. So there's a few ways of doing flashes, and I think they're really useful to have, even if you're only holding them for 2 frames or a very brief period of time. Flashes are good.
They kind of pull your attention towards something very quickly, right? Because you instantly see it.
They also have one thing I like. I've never done this myself, but I really like the effect that I think is trying to emulate those old NES games where the thing will kind of flash out of existence for a moment. I think that looks really good. I think it's a bit of a nostalgia factor thing, but like in like the original Legend of Zelda and stuff, things just were really flickery, and it's like the enemy would get hit, they'd flash, then they'd vanish, and then come back. I don't know if that was a result of like sprite overlap and more of a bug, or if it was intentional, but I really like that effect as well. I've never done that before, but I think that's a fun one. I'm sure you felt this when you keep playing your game over and over again. It can become a bit grating. You're playing the same chunk of gameplay over and over and over and over. I tend to find that if I add just a tiny bit of extra juice somewhere, it just makes it a bit more fun for me to play through again. So I liked to just sprinkle in little bits of extra stuff as I was making the game. So if I was testing a really long dungeon and I had to keep playing through it, sometimes I'd think, I wish those coins looked a bit nicer. So I'd make the coins look nicer. And then every time I was playing through, I'd notice the coin animation and it'd make me happy. So that was the thing I liked to do.
But do you think there's some way you can learn to get a feel for all of these game feel details? Like, you seem to be somebody who naturally pays attention to these kind of things when you play a game, right? Or you notice something feels off about this. I feel like this is not a skill that's necessarily a given. I feel like this is more something you really have to pay attention to, or a skill you have to acquire. Like, how do you think? How did that skill develop for you? That attention to detail.
I think the main thing that happened was I was working on a game a while ago, and I was like, this feels like rubbish. So what I basically did was I watched videos of other games, and I used the little YouTube feature to make them play in slow motion, and I was just trying to work out what is even going on. Why does my game look like rubbish and these ones look good? And so, yeah, when I watched everything in slow motion in these games, I could see all this stuff going on all over the place. And yeah, it just looks so good. Okay,
so at some point you were just like, I want to figure out how to make my games feel better, and then you dove in really deep, and then after that probably you noticed those things a lot more.
Yeah, I became a bit obsessed.
Okay. It paid off. I think.
Thank you.
Awesome. You can find IDoZ on YouTube. He has a YouTube channel. You can find his game Archvale on Steam. Highly recommend you check it out. If you want to start making games, there's no better tool than GameMaker. Click the link in the description and get started now. My name is Jonas Tyroller, and I'll be guest posting on the GameMaker YouTube channel every once in a while now, so make sure to subscribe. Thanks again to GameMaker for making this possible, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.